Well, good morning. 2 minutes later than we mainly because I'm onto one of the things, pop things up, and it did. So I had to kick the machinery. Anyway, I'm Keith Hayes, Mirador Television. It says that we're all connected up, and why that happens, heaven only knows. All this thing is mystery to me, and will remain so for the rest of my life. I'm afraid I'm not of the computer generation, so I just have to accept that these things happen. If I kick it, just the same as you kicked an old piece of machinery and made it work, it works too. Nothing changes. All right. In 20 minutes, 25 minutes, we are going to be joined by the two Bs, the two barristers, Philip and Richard, and they are going to take us behind the scenes of the goings and doings and froings of the court system. But for the moment, we're going to take a look at the headlines. Just to say, though, that throughout a little later in the day, it hopefully will be my pleasure to highlight one or two things that Stephen Catlin did for us. Some of you have said, "Who is Stephen Catlin?" Which means that you're not really imbued in this town, because Stephen Catlin has been a fixture in Lewes for many, many years. He ran a sweet shop on the high street, and it was a lovely little sweet shop. My late wife loved going in there because, as a Canadian, she was able to say a quarter of this and a quarter of that, which she's not able to do in her hometown, her home country. And Stephen retired, closed the shop, much to the chagrin of many of us, and then he went into politics. He was a very, very successful independent councillor, and 2 years ago was mayor of this town. And he was fearless. And he, until his last election, was an independent. And he showed his independence, and I've got clips showing how independent he was and what a treasure he was, because he stood head and shoulders above almost every, I say almost, because there are one or two decent politicians in this town, not many, but one or two. And he stood head and shoulders above everybody. So that is Stephen Catlin. Now, let's take a look at the wider spectrum, the wider world, because it's a whole variety of headlines again this morning. The Daily Mail is families face £1,000 a year bill for Labour eco plans. And it says Prince Harry has been accused of wasting court time after he missed the first day of the trial into alleged phone hacking. The Mail says it claims families could be facing £1,000 a year for a green energy plan that the Labour Party is proposing. Oh, there we are. The fight is on. Right. And the Metro, the judge raps absent Harry. And the Metro leads on Prince Harry and comments made by the judges at the High Court. The paper says the Duke will give evidence on Tuesday, with his barrister saying he didn't appear on Monday, didn't appear yesterday, because he is in a different category to other witnesses due to his travel and security arrangements. Oh, well, that's okay then. My travel arrangements is, now that I've got a scooter, is they're all over the place. And well, actually, I've got two barristers that I can rely on. No, I can't. They would kick my ass if I got myself into trouble. Yes, that's the sort of relationship we have. They are very forthright, to say the least. But Harry has got a special category. I shall do my best to get into that category. Lots of travel and security arrangements. Believe me, the people that I rile in this town, I need security arrangements. The Daily Express, Prime Minister, more barges will help deter migrant crossings, it says. Rishi Sunak has bought more barges to house, purchased, cash in hand, to house migrants in an attempt to deter small boat crossings. The front page also has a picture of Holly Willoughby, oh dear, with her hands on her chest while admitting to being shaken and troubled as she returned to this morning's sofa for the first time since Philip Schofield's departure. You know, I mean, this woman is a lightweight. I'm sorry, I have spent 60 years developing talent. I understand what talent is. May not have it myself, but I am a good observer, and I understand what talent is. And this woman is a lightweight. She's okay. She's nothing special. I have no idea why they're getting their knickers into a twist. Mainly, I think, is because they got ill-trained executives in the television industry now. They don't know. As a friend of mine said, late friend of mine said, they don't know what they don't know. So as a consequence, they get their knickers into a twist over absolutely nothing. Silly nonsense, that whole thing. The Mirror. Dear Mr. Sunak, please remember our Jack. The Mirror takes a different tack. It talks about the a 10-year-old Jack. Not sure what his other name was. Jack Liss was killed by a dog in 2021. Along with his mother's plea for Sunak to remember our Jack, because at the time, of course, politicians are going to do everything to make sure that nobody else dies from a dog attack. And she's saying, hey, come on, we're now 3 years down the road, or more than 2 years down the road, and you've done nothing. So please remember. The Daily Telegraph, the Prime Minister set to overrule the Lords on the boats bill. Let's see, I agreed with them on, you have to agree with everything nowadays. I agree with cookies, and I don't know a clue what cookies do. Right, okay, so we were on the Telegraph. The Prime Minister said to overrule the Lords on the boats bill. Basically says, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has indicated he's prepared to defy the House of Lords and force his proposed law to tackle small boat crossings through Parliament. The Lords, of course, being somewhat liberal, and of course every government stuffs them as full as they possibly can, so that the Lords will be swayed towards legislation. But Sunak is getting heavy with them, and it is possible, but it's not very often used. But he's ready to do that when it comes to migration. And I think that basically what's happening is that the Tories are now beginning to hammer their colours to the mast. And the key fight for the next election is going to be the question of asylum seekers and immigration. And you can already smell in the air where people who support Labour are saying we don't have enough workers and it's all because of Brexit. And the government, Rishi Sunak, saying, hang on, it's all these people are coming in illegally, so it's keeping out illegal people. Oh, what a fight, what a fight, what a fight. The Times, French are stopping half of boat migrants after a £480 million deal. In other words, we're paying the French to stop them. Thank God we're outside the EU. Because that's what you do to friends, let alone, God, I hope it's what you do to enemies. But the main thrust is 2 years to save the world, says the artificial intelligence advisor. And I'm beginning to take this whole thing quite seriously now. If some of these experts are saying that it can get out of control, then it's about time that the government paid attention to it. I think they probably are at this stage. The Times says the French authorities are intercepting more than half of attempted channel crossings for the first time in a 5-year period. Following a $480 million deal. It also catches stories on II, an interview with advisor who warns there are only 2 years to save the world from disaster and that countries must work together to regulate it now. Right. Okay. The I, COVID families fury as inquiry into the NHS failures are delayed until after the election. Ha! What did they expect? No government will take on the NHS. It's a sacred cow. You walk outside this hotel and you say to somebody, oh, the NHS is in dreadful trouble, they'll defend it. The fact that they haven't a clue what they're defending, they think they're defending doctors and nurses. Nothing can be further from the truth. It's the bureaucracy. But we've allowed this bureaucracy to take over our entire being, and we do nothing about it. And, governments make a lot of noise. Politicians make a lot of noise, but they actually are too frightened to take on some things. And the NHS is one of them, which is in desperate need of reform. Oh, I'm sorry I swore. You never ever say reform to a politician. Ever. They don't believe in it. Neither the EU nor us. We do not believe in reform. Huh. Goodness gracious me, no. It's just the same as with the banks. We let them have their way. Why? Because the politicians are scared silly of them. If they pull the rug, they're in dreadful trouble. So COVID families are angry because an inquiry into the NHS failures has been delayed until after the election. Well, not a bit surprised. And the bereaved families who lost loved ones in the COVID pandemic have hit out at the official inquiry for failing to investigate the NHS and care home responses until after the next general election. The Eye says inquiry evidence has been moved out of chronological order, and Chairman Lady Hallett will now hear reports on the government's successful vaccination rollout in the lead up to the next national ballot. Oh, politics gets in the way again. The Daily Star. The Prime Minister takes 74-mile helicopter trip instead of getting the train like the rest of us. Oiks. Fishy Rishi, it says, gets his chopper out again. Yeah, you've got to admire the Star's leader writers. They really can be very, very funny. Very funny indeed. But the Star says Sunak took a 74-mile helicopter ride instead of catching the train from London to Dover for his small boats announcement. The Sun. It's all over with Matty. Not quite sure what that is. Taylor and Brit Rocker split after 1 month. That was a Swift one. Taylor Swift. Even I know that name, but I don't know much about her. But apparently she's split from her new lover boy. And we all have to know about that. It is Financial Times. That's it. It's all over with Matty. It's apparently her boyfriend whose name Matty. Never mind. Financial Times. Staff data stolen from BA, BBC, and Boots by hack and leak cyber gang. And the FT leads on staff data being compromised at companies including British Airways, Boots, and the BBC, and with an attack poised to spread to the United States. Well, you know, the computer industry have actually backed themselves into a corner. It is just absolutely silly what they're doing at the moment. I mean, you third-party identification, and so you're in a hurry, but you have to. Oh, I haven't got my phone. My phone's not charged. I can't get into my. Oh dear. It's there. I just advertised Cafe Nero. No charge. At The Guardian, Ukraine troops intensify frontline raids in apparent shift in strategy. Well, we haven't heard much from the front lately. So The Guardian's leader, with the latest from the Ukraine, says Ukrainian troops went on the attack at multiple points along the frontier front line in the Donetsk region on Monday. I've worked in the Donetsk region, so in my mind, I've got some sort of idea of the terrain that the troops are raging over in their battle. The front page of The Guardian carries a picture of a Ukrainian soldier in a pickup truck making the V for Victory sign. The paper says Ukraine appears to be in the preliminary stages of its long-anticipated counteroffensive. Well, there we are. Those are the headlines on the front pages, and let's just see if what we can do is take a quick look and see if there's anything local that we should be aware of. Let's see. Sussex Live, major roadworks are impacting Sussex this week. Well, there's be sure to plan ahead if your route will be impeached, it says. Let's see. Not a lot more that's new. Plans for 46 home developments rejected due to unacceptable impact on the area. Where's that? For an East Sussex development. To stop flipping around. In Wealdon District Council's Planning Committee concluded that building of proposed homes at Rosemead Farm in Horsham, is it? In Horham, sorry, would be counterproductive. Okay, that's a quick trip through. What about the weather? As long as we're together, well, it's cool first thing in the morning. I'm sorry to say, but the overall forecast as the day goes on is not bad at all. Not at all bad. Is today we're going to hit 19 degrees, which is cooler than it has been, but it started off from a low of 8. But you'll be happy to know that tomorrow it's going to rise to 21, and by Saturday we're going to be up to 24, and it's going to stay 24 for 3 or 4 days. Today is sunny and a moderate breeze. I feel safe in wearing my hat with a moderate breeze. So that's where we stand there. Okie dokie. Let me just find something to keep us. I know. We haven't played out. Well, I hope that you can see me, and at the moment I'm just making contact with Philip and with Richard. It just has to. Let's see. You just have to live with me for a moment, and because. It's very tricky, this. It's all to do with email. Right, okay. Now, look, hopefully I've just got off the links to them, and they will be appearing just shortly after 9 o'clock, and with the usual banter, usual repartee, but the usual serious stuff too, and informative stuff about how our courts work. Because to be quite honest with you, apart from watching the odd drama, like Judge John Deed chasing every female in sight, as I know very little about how our courts work. But these two gentlemen, the doobies, the two barristers, are full of knowledge about this sort of thing, and they bring that to us. And it very informative it is. Okay, now let me just very briefly say that I am preparing some material on Stephen Catlin, which I hope I will be showing later in the day. Stephen Catlin was a gem. He was a remarkable man. I know actually, and I'm not being disrespectful to many other people, because there are some decent people floating around in politics. Yes, there are. You have to find them. You have to look for them. But I, in my life, have had the privilege of knowing 3 politicians who are in it totally for their community and not for themselves, never benefited one jot or tittle from being in politics. One was our past MP, Norman Baker. One was a lady called Grace McCarthy, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of British Columbia. And the third was Stephen Catlin, who was mayor of this town 2 years ago, and who sadly passed away at the weekend. And he will be missed, because not only was he independent, but he was forthright. He called a spade a shovel, and he made sure, and those people down at the town hall who like to think that just because they've been elected they can just do anything anyway, and to hell with the way things are supposed to be done. I don't know, perhaps legally so. They just ignore it. Is he would keep them in? He would keep them in check. Right. Okay. Now, where are we? It is 5-2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, while we're waiting for Richard, I'm going to actually bring on Philip because he's good value for money on his own. Hello, Philip.
That's very kind of you, Keith. How are you?
Not too bad. No, it's I'm feeling feisty this morning. Feeling in fine fettle.
I just caught the end bit of your condolences about the ex-mayor passing away and how that gentleman, as you put it, kept the waywardness of councillors in check. I was briefly a councillor in Arundel many years ago, and then I became town clerk for an equally brief time. It was probably the worst thing I ever chose to do. And my God, how your words resonate. It's a bear garden.
Absolutely, and it needn't be, in my view.
I
believe that party politics have ruined local governance. Totally ruined it. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Are we live?
You are live, and Philip and I are just discussing Stephen Catlin and local politics.
I did want to say, but before, can I just talk about this for a second, because people will notice that I've got a...
Yes. Can you lean a little bit closer to your microphone?
Yep. Oh,
that's
sorry.
It.
We can't hear you, Richard.
Well, that's because you're deaf, Philip.
Here we go.
So, well, as opposed,
at least I'm not sporting a black eye.
No, exactly. So, as
only you could choose to come public on the TV with a shiner.
Well,
as if it's some badge of honour.
The Dick and Dumb show has turned into the Dumb and Dumber show because I successfully managed to have my dog trip me over and fell over when I was away last week. And I thought it was fine. I just bumped the side of my head and it looked fine. And then the next morning, this started evolving. And the jury I was in front of clearly thought I was a right thug, which probably wasn't a bad thing in terms of the case. You know, nobody was going to mess with me. I didn't.
Well, you secured a conviction very quickly, didn't you?
I did, thank you, Philip. Yeah. And the other advantage of it, Keith, I can tell you now, is that having this when travelling back from where I was, because I stayed over because of the rail strikes, no one sat next to me on the train. They just assumed I was some thug.
Are you able to talk about your case?
Yeah, I can now. It's yet to be sentenced. It was I was dealing with a very unfortunate case, and I think I've already spoken to you, Keith, about driving cases anyway. And this was somebody who was charged with causing death by careless driving whilst unfit through drink. And it was quite challenging because aside from managing a family of the bereaved who were there, who understandably wanted the defendant to go to prison forever, and that's simply not going to happen. You know, it's not murder. There was toxicology that I had to deal with. In other words, dealing with the issues that revolve around the level of drink and that included pre-collision drinking and post-collision drinking. I had to deal with, not particularly in this case, but the mechanical issues of the vehicle, road traffic collision evidence, and pathology. And so there's as I think I've said before, it's quite a specialised skill set. Phil, I don't know what your views are on it.
Well, I am not just saying this because it's you. I know how good you are at your job, and that's an understatement. What you had to deal with in the case you just described, by way of the package of expertise that you had to, get together and present effectively to lay people, it is a very, very difficult and very particular, unique skill. And you have it in spades. Now, we were going to, weren't we, talk about expert evidence in a programme.
We will at some point, Phil, if that's okay. But I know you've been. Might I just say this for what it's worth before we start? I know that you've been talking about Stephen Catlin, and I think Keith, you did something about him yesterday, maybe, as I recall. I just want to say what a wonderful character he was around Lewes, and I only found out about his death from my daughters, who are on some sort of chat group, because they remember his shop on the high street, Catlin's on the high street, which was a tobacconist and sweet shop, and I used to take them in there, and he'd be the one, old-fashioned sweets, and they loved it, absolutely loved it. But equally, he was a fantastic campaigning councillor, and he had a passion for the town. And I hope you made reference to John Agard's words about him.
I haven't, but we're looking for a copy of that Louisian that it.
Right, I've got it. I can send it to you, Keith.
Good. Thank you.
He was a big mover in the making sure that small green spaces in Lewes, in the town centre, weren't neglected, and you'd see him. And this is something that John refers to. John, who's another great, obviously, Lewes character, to say the least. You'd see him, digging and watering and planting things in these. As you know, there are many of these little places in Lewes where there's a bit of rough ground. And he did that beautifully. He also, I will say to his credit, moaned to me about my fig tree, which was growing over, and so it hit his head as he walked into town. So he was very combative in some ways, but he's a great loss because.
Yeah. Can I just make a couple of comments, Richard, because you raised something. That strip of land that he carefully tended, and which just last week or the week before, he said, unfortunately, has been let go because he was too unwell to be able to tend it. And I think this is a disgrace that the local council let it go. But it was known as the secret garden. And I am just looking through our archives because we did a program with Stephen about the secret garden, and I'm going to replay it. And as a tribute, I think it should be called Catlin's Place or Catlin's Garden or something of that sort. Whether they'll have the imagination or even the thoughtfulness to do that, I don't know. But I'm going to keep after it because it was his heart and soul, that garden, the secret garden, and it was a beautiful little place. Only very tiny, but absolutely magnificent. The other thing is that you are absolutely right. We hear a lot about green this and green that and green the other, and not any of them except him got their fingers dirty and went and tended the little gardens and the bits and pieces with shrubs and bushes and so on. He and one or two of his friends would get out there and dig and make sure that they were okay. So yes, he was an exceptional man, and he will be missed, really missed.
No question at all. And I'll miss seeing him on the street. You know, I never socialized with him, but I'd see him on the street and we'd have a chat about things, and he'd tell me about his latest campaign, whatever that was, or about things that he was interested in. And he'd tell anybody that as well. You know, he was completely open to talking to anybody about these issues. But Phil, I'm sure in Arundel you have characters as well like that.
Yes, we do. I remember Catlin very well myself, mainly through the shop. And then after the shop closed, or he moved it on, I would see him in the street and he would always remember me.
Yes.
I don't know whether he thought I lived in Lewes or not, but he would always remember me. And he always, bizarrely, but it shows what a gent he was, because he didn't know my name, he always called me sir. As if I was still a customer of his.
He always did that.
But the funniest story I can relate to you about that shop is that there was then a particular barman working in the local we always used, who was genuinely dyspraxic, absolute accident area, right? And I went in the pub one day and that barman was relating to a colleague behind the bar that Catlin had got so sick of him going in there and knocking everything over, card racks, you name it. Whenever that chap went in, it was a disaster zone, and he barred him from the shop. He actually barred him from the shop. I was hooting with laughter because I can just imagine him doing it.
Yes. Phil, the reason he remembered you was because you'd go and buy 2.5 pounds of sweets every day when you were in Lewes. Let's be fair, and that explains.
No, come on.
That explains a lot.
Yes. Thank you, Richard.
Anytime, love.
Lovey, darling.
Yeah.
Anyway, God rest him. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And I hope that Keith's recommendation there to the council finds favour in terms of some suitable tribute to him. Not just a permanent tribute to him. I think he is one of those characters who deeply merits that.
Well, I would suggest a petition.
Well, I would happily start one on Mirador to try and persuade them to do that. I don't know whether you were aware, but he was a correspondent for us for a while and did a thing called Catlin's Corner.
I've seen.
I've got several copies of past Catlin's Corner in which he holds low punches. I mean, he has a real go. And I, over the next 10 days or so, I plan to play some of these, because there is a whole new generation and a whole new influx in Lewes who aren't aware of this man. And yet he was a giant, an absolute giant. And of all things, was honest.
Completely. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more, Keith. And thank you for letting
He was a giant in every sense of the word, other than the fact that he was actually shorter than Richard Barton.
Yes.
Only when he was sitting down.
Which takes some doing.
It's just, I'm sorry, it just reminds me, this is a total red herring, but in Northern Ireland, the head of the tourist board was a gentleman called Jack Swinson, who was knighted. Sir Jack Swinson, and he was about the same stature as Stephen Catlin. And he used to start all his speeches by saying, "Good evening, I am the shortest knight of the year."
That is very good. That is very good. It is a truth, Keith, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but all men are the same height. If you were to take off their penis and put it on the top of their head, it's a very, very well known fact. So,
Well, it is in your case.
yeah.
And I won't use the profanity
Don't.
to describe a man with his penis on his head.
No, don't. I know. Yes, exactly. Phil, we were going to talk something about law, but maybe we could just have a general chat.
Well, Keith might be amused. If I've told this story before, stop me, Richard. But you and I have an ex-colleague who we've both known for many years. I for very many years, because I was in chambers with her back in the 80s.
Yep.
And she is, and you know who I mean.
Yes.
She lives locally now, and she is very diminutive, very not tall. And I did a case with her at the old Knightsbridge Crown Court years ago, a customs case.
Just explain to us that was the one that was round the back of Harrods, wasn't it?
That was the one that was the Hans Hotel.
Yep.
Behind Harrods. And it was a converted hotel. So, for example, Court 5 and 6 in the bowels of the building used to be the spa and the swimming pool. It was all rather odd.
Was it still a swimming pool? If you were in there, did all the jurors have to sort of do doggy paddle whilst you were talking to them?
Well, it's when they bought their bathing caps that rather worried me. But
I imagine they brought their goggles when they were looking at you. Yeah.
And there was an infamous old-style judge who sat in Court 5 called Judge Friend. And that was not an opposite word for him. He was the most unfriendly tribunal ever. And he would dish out the porridge big time. Because this was when street muggings were at their height.
Right.
And also the sus law was still in. So there were, I'm afraid, rather disproportionate numbers of young men of colour being tried for muggings. And Judge Friend's speciality was to throw the key away if he could, if they were convicted. But I mention this because there was also an annex. There was courts 11 and 12 that were literally on the street at the back of Harrods, literally on the street. And in one of those courts sat a judge called Mendel, Mendl. And Judge Mendel was a man who suffered from appalling migraines. And in his court, he would have to keep the lighting so low that you could hardly see each other. I mean, you ask who I'm talking about this, she will confirm it was bizarre. You know, you almost needed infrared vision at times. Anyway, we were co-defending. We were representing two nuns, believe it or not, who had been charged with drug peddling. Anyway.
Sorry, did you say nuns?
Nuns, Nuns. And we were calling character witnesses who were also nuns.
This sounds a very plausible story, Phil. But carry on. It's a good story. I'm not saying it's not a good story.
Another aspect of it was that the Police and Criminal Evidence Act had been in force for 2 years. And the Police and Criminal Evidence Act codified to protect the suspect, and in a sense the police, codified how they treated people in custody in particular.
Just pausing there. Just pausing there. Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, as I recall.
Correct.
It also, I think Leon Britton was the Home Secretary at the time. It had a range of codes linked to it. In other words, documents that it made that aren't strictly statutes, but are in fact regulations, might be a better term.
Well, they're codes of practice.
Codes of practice. So these are things that police have to do. Prior to that, it was the Wild West.
Well, this is the reason I hope, not boring you with this story, because I began to cross-examine the office. Don't interrupt. I was the one cross-examining the officer in the case about the way my client had been arrested and apparently interviewed. And I said, you don't appear to have complied with the codes in pace. And I kid you not, he turned round and said, what's pace?
Do you know
and that was typical of customs officers then.
Completely. And in fact, when I was at college at the time that it came in, and I had a close friend there, same college as me, studying law, whose father was a police officer. And this is from up north, who left the force because he said, I can't deal with all these new regulations. In other words, he couldn't do what he wanted.
I'm sure he wasn't the only one.
Yeah. Did the judge ask you at the end of the prosecution case whether you were calling evidence, and you said none?
Oh, you are funny. Problem is, you tell these jokes in court and they go down like a lead balloon. However, the real point of the story was our then female colleague, very diminutive, made a legal submission at half time. In other words, the end of the prosecution case, she made a submission of no case to answer as a matter of law, based on what she suggested was the weakness of the evidence against her client. Judge Mendel refused it and then said, and Miss Rowling, sorry, I've mentioned her name, Miss Rowling, you could at least have stood up during making the submission. And Fiona said, I am standing up. Because there were lecterns on top of the benches, and literally, particularly in the bad light, all you could see was her head peeking over the lectern. And Mendel thought she'd sat down throughout the whole argument.
Phil, you remind me of the long-suffering Mrs. Barton, who, may I just say, when I point this out,
that's the other eye.
Yeah, that one there.
Yeah.
It has been indicated to me by my family, and it's true, that she is in fact left-handed. So
yes, and a good haymaker from Mrs. B could have worsened that injury.
Well, no. Well, I think they believe that she's inflicted it on me, and for many good reasons.
Well, a good reason to support that theory is that how on earth you managed to get such a bruise, having so little a distance to fall, I just failed to see.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Yeah. Just on that, it's a slightly interesting diversion there, topic. I've got another thing I want to say, but let me say the first one. When I first started at the bar, you could get a medic to say, that bruise there is 4 or 5 days old.
Yeah.
And as we all know, bruises go through the sort of the rainbow, purple, green, yellow, that sort of thing. And the learning changed, and it is now impossible to get any medic to age a bruise, which can sometimes be problematic in terms of cases, because a defendant might say, well, I didn't do that, they already had that, or I didn't do that, they did it afterwards. And there's no, from a prosecution's point of view, there's no way that you can gainsay that.
Well, I find it interesting. I didn't know that. It is a long time since I've done a case involving that. And that will never happen again, obviously. But I didn't realise that.
Yes, and I know it also from the people who at Westgate, our chambers, who deal with family work, because obviously,
Yeah.
sadly, occasionally they have to deal with children who have been injured in some way, and exactly the same thing applies. But anyway, let me tell you a story about the ever suffering, hard punching Mrs. Barton. Yeah, exactly. Quite. We.
That woke Keith up.
She's just down the road. She may come storming in here and blame
She's downstairs, for Keith. We went on holiday with what was in fact with my sister and her family. This is and it was up to Scotland, and that's when I proposed to her. She claims I didn't propose. I just said we're going to get married. But anyway, whatever.
I believe her.
Yeah, of course you believe her. And we stayed in these very nice static lodges in the country. And we had...
Hang on, a static lodge? Do you normally stay in lodges that move, or...?
No, it sort of theoretically could have been moved, but they were there, right. So it was, yeah. And my parents were there, my sister and her family were there, we were there, and whenever we went on holiday together, we'd have a fancy dress competition, because you do, don't you? You know, that's what you do when you go away. And
absolutely, I used to do it all the time, yeah.
And we'd have a rule which would say you've got up to this amount of money to go and get your costume locally, and ideally from the charity shops. So I recall my brother-in-law was Tina Turner. So we're all going to be famous people. Mrs. B was Paul Gascoigne, and
interesting,
various other things. And so we had to vote on who was the best fancy dress costume. And the people who won the best dressed fancy dress costume were the two nuns staying in the other lodge. And they were actually nuns.
Maybe they were my clients from all those years ago.
Yeah, who you got off at Kingston. Who can say? You never know, do you? You never can tell.
Well, yesterday here in Arundel, I was visited, thanks to a mutual friend, Guy Russell, who still is a member of our chambers.
Yes.
By a certain Nicholas Hall, who lives in Lewes and has for many years.
He does. He lives quite close to where I live, in fact, and I see him.
Indeed, he does, in a rather precipitous location, I have to say. Yes. Anyway, and I've stayed there the once because there was a time when one of his sons was critically ill, having fallen off a pillar in Portsmouth Guildhall Square and given himself a fractured skull and so on. Thankfully, the boy survived. But when I was joint head of chambers, that happened, and I took them out for a meal and did my best to give him a bit of support because he was very, very worried. So I stayed there the once, but I'm only mentioning it because yesterday in our local pub, Guy, our friend, took me in the car. Otherwise, I couldn't have got there. And of course, Nick, like me, is retired.
How did he get you into the car, Phil? Because you're a big fella. You know, did he have a roof rack or something?
No, I was on the roof rack. He strapped me to the roof because he had a dog in the car as well.
Yeah,
it was hilarious. He came round, Guy, with his daughter's little lap dog, the most pathetic animal I've ever seen. Right, because he's looking after the daughter's house while she's on holiday with the dog. So he turns up in the car. I get in the car. He says, hold the dog. So he and I are driving into Arundel, open top car, two men together, me holding a lap dog.
Yes.
What sexuality do you think passers-by thought we were?
Well, Phil, I've got to tell you now, most members of Westgate have always thought about that in relation to you.
Yes.
And we're totally open to it. Trans Phil is something that people call you.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
I can understand it. But anyway, I only mention this because I and Nick, being two old codgers, retired, were chewing the cud. Anyway, he didn't know about Mirador Television. So I've told him about Mirador Television, and he's promised me to hook up.
Well, he does know about it, the line.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. Because I've told him about it when I bump
Oh,
into
right.
him, which happens quite often, as I said.
Well, he claimed to me he didn't know about it. But there we are.
I might not have given the name of it to him.
Well, we are actually growing quite quickly after a disaster of lockdown. So people are becoming reacquainted. But I have to say that the two Bs have gone off the scale when it comes to viewership.
I did notice that with some pride and pleasure, I have to say. But it is all down to B1.
I like the strap line, by the way. Philip M, also known as B2.
Yes, well, I thought I'd do that.
And I'm not going to tell you what the B stands for in his particular case, but there we go.
Yeah. Well, it's open territory, you know.
So many ways in your case, Phil. So many ways. Yeah.
Why I do this, I don't know. It's ritualistic. I don't know. It's
humiliation.
Ridiculous.
It's
yes.
Good. It's good for you. It prevents you from doing that self-flagellation thing.
Well, I can't do that with my bad arm now.
No, exactly. And when Mrs. Meredith isn't there, as I know she isn't today, and she would normally be the one berating you, you get it from a different source. That's all.
Yes. I'd rather have it from her, really, but there we go. But I am a masochist. I always have been.
Yeah. Just talking about your viewership, by the way. At the moment, I'm meeting regularly with a gentleman. I won't give you his name because I don't have permission to, but who is looking at Mirador and trying to develop a bit more of a coherent plan for us. But he asked me to look at trends. And you'll be interested to know that the global trend, non-drama television, globally, is the number one program is Law.
Really?
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
I suppose people are interested. And, you know, we haven't talked about Law, Phil, today. I don't think probably we.
Well, we've been going for nearly an hour.
Well, you might have been going nearly an hour.
And time has flown because I'm having such a good time.
Yeah, I can tell that. I can tell how much you're enjoying yourself. But
I'm enjoying looking at you because, you know, if only you could see yourself. You look like Compo with a black eye. It's just brilliant. And for you to portray yourself as a really top barrister, which you are, is just so funny. People looking at you.
Well, given that this, as you said, caused the jury that I was in front of to agree with me so very quickly yesterday, permitting me to be here today, I'm thinking of going down to Boots and getting some mascara and just keeping it on there.
Well, Mrs. B or one of your girls will have some mascara, won't they?
They wouldn't let me borrow it, Phil. Let's be fair.
Actually, that's a very valid point.
And also, I want my own color.
Yes, well, it's an image thing, isn't it? It's personal taste.
Very much so.
Well, you could buy a range of rainbow colours, and then you could have a bruise that's aging.
Albeit, as I've told you, the experts will say you can't age them, but I think, in fact, that's a silly piece of learning on the doctor's part. I think you can, within reason, tell the age of a bruise. It's one of those areas.
Well, look, we all know from personal experience how a bruise changes.
Yeah.
And it changes because it's aging.
Yeah.
It's developing. It's a hematoma. It's developing. And as you say, it has its range of colours.
And it's a little bit like the toxicology that I had in the case I've just finished, where, how much alcohol has somebody drunk, forward calculation, back calculation, compensation for drink you might have had afterwards, compensation for drink that you might have ingested but has yet to get into your bloodstream. And they end up with such woolly figures that you just think this is hopeless. And I can sort of understand it. But it's frustrating from a lawyer's point of view, where you want an answer and they never give an answer.
Well, I mean, the viewers may not know, but what they do, you mentioned in your case, the defendant, there had been post-accident drinking as well. And what, no doubt, your expert wanted to do upon instructions was to work out how much alcohol was in his blood at the time of the collision.
I believe the jury dismissed that. Post-collision, he went and bought some wine, went home. And I think they concluded that he didn't drink any of that himself.
Interesting. But in normal circumstances, that expert would do what we call back calculation, wouldn't he or she?
Well, yeah. So there's a forward calculation, which is if this is the level of alcohol that's been drunk, what does that mean in terms of level at the time of the collision? And then there's the back calculation, which is given what somebody blows on breath or blood or urine, however it's taken, working back from that. But again, a difficulty about that is that different people metabolize alcohol at different rates. And
I wouldn't know about that.
Well, I can tell you now, Phil, and this may be some cold comfort to you, and it certainly is to me, is that people who are inveterate drinkers, no, I'm not naming anybody,
move on.
In fact, metabolize quicker than those who don't drink as quickly. And there's a whole range.
I think I might have to agree with that.
Yeah, and there's a whole. Well, I know it's true. But I've probably told you I had a friend who we did some tests. He was less of a drinker than me. He's a doctor, but he had a breathalyzer machine, and I was, metabolizing it at twice his rate when we had a drink. There's just one other thing I ought to tell you about that case, not about the case, but on Friday, I had a really good the officer in the case, that is the police officer who runs it from the police investigation point of view. He was proper copper who, he was my wingman for the case, dealt with a whole range of things, was often dealing with things before I asked him to deal with them. Invaluable in a case like that. And on Friday, I said to him, "So, Rick, what are you doing at the weekend?" and he said, "I'm going to the Derby." I said, "Oh, that's nice, great. You're gonna, go and enjoy yourself." He said, "No, I'm going to go and arrest some people, and then I'm going to be, standing at Tottenham Corner," which is what he did.
Well, they nicked a lot of people, and they even intercepted cars on the way to the ground.
Yeah,
at roadblocks,
and that was all based on intel.
Yeah,
and it saved problems. And I know that the protesters were saying the race should have been stopped because there was somebody on the course. You think, well, hold it. Why was there somebody on the course? Oh, it was one of your lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, one managed to get through, a bloke, but they dealt with him incredibly quickly.
Yeah, he's been in front of the magistrates and has been remanded in custody.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, I see Keith looking rather worriedly at the time we're taking.
I'm sorry.
Actually, we do have to sort of start to think about getting off. But what I'm interested in is I'm getting little things on my Facebook account, or one of them, that I put a little tribute to Stephen Catlin on next door, and people are coming back saying that they're reading it and enjoying it. So
Excellent.
It's working. But I wonder if Richard, you said a couple of things that have sparked some memories in me. First of all, in the 1990s, when I was broadcasting at Reuters Television, we used to have to put makeup on because the cameras couldn't handle the bare skin, as it were. And it was the only job I ever had where I could go home with makeup on my collar and say to my wife, "I was just at work, dear."
You can take it off now, Keith. You don't need to wear it now.
It's around the collar still. But secondly, you talk about Mrs. B and Mrs. H, God bless her soul, I met her when I was at a radio station in Vancouver, and she was in the accounts department. And I would go and get an advance against my salary, and then I would bugger off at lunchtime to the beer parlor. And one day she said, what do you do with these advances? So I said, well, I go for a beer. And she said, well, you're not getting any more unless you take me with you, which I did. And it was a very pleasant experience. And then one day she said, do you know how much you owe? And I said, no. She said, $25, which was a fortune in those days. And she looked me in the eye and said, I'll pay it off if you marry me. I said, yes, very quickly. The best decision I ever made.
That is a wonderful story.
That is lovely, Keith.
No, that's an absolute peach of a story.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I may ask, Keith, is she still with us?
No, she's not. Unfortunately, no. She died in 2013. But she loved Catlin's shop too, because being Canadian, she could go in and say, I have a quarter of this and a quarter of that, which she couldn't do in her home country.
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. That's a fabulous story.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I mean, please don't apologize because you've had a morning's chat. It's absolutely fascinating and highly amusing. And please feel free to do this as much as your informative sessions about the courts and so on. Of course, you still have promised to take us to the back rooms of the police in Lewis as well one day. But if you actually do find, Richard, that you've got the week off because of a good jury, we'd love to see you back on Friday.
Okay, I'll see what I can do.
All right.
Sorry, I don't mean to be difficult, but you'll appreciate things change all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we'd even take the other B on his own if you can't make it. But you are sort of our favourites on Mirador at the moment, so we're very happy to accommodate you.
That's very kind.
I think it's best. Personally, I think it's best as a double act. It breaks it up. It's more interesting than just one of us spouting off.
It depends which
a friendly judge.
One's spouting. Let's be fair.
Sorry, Richard. Unlike you, Keith just said something very witty, and I missed it because you interrupted.
Can't even remember what I said now. Something about the judge.
Yes, you did. So the judge, yes. Yes, and Richard, you do need to get your volume sorted out. I'm sorry.
What?
Shall we say goodbye?
Yes, say
Goodbye.
toodle pip, but I do hope that you can rearrange things so that we can see you again on Friday, both of you. It's always a delight, and I don't have to tell you that the more you appear, the more fans you accrue. So yeah, I'm delighted with having you both on and having these sort of little chats that are. Look into the personality and the background of you both. So don't shy away from doing that.
Thank you, Keith. All right.
We won't, or I won't, certainly. But one thing I won't be appearing with is a black eye.
Well, now he's going to go down and get some makeup from his wife.
Anyway, goodbye all. See you sometime soon.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye. Okay, well, a very interesting half hour spent there with Philip and Richard, and what goes on in the robing room, and the two Bs, and hopefully we'll see them again on Friday with some more stories from the back rooms of the courts. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little break, a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back with another chapter of the bloody past of a tiny town, apparently around the world, the programs that are trending as law and history. So we've got both those on this morning. As one gentleman pointed out on social media, he said, I look, but I only see things that are fairly old on Mirador. When we're live, we're fresh. What you just saw this morning was absolutely new and different, never to see again. Although anybody who wants to catch up with them can now get onto the internet and see them on YouTube and on the other social media or on miradortelevision.com. And we'll be back in 10 minutes at the very most. Until then, is a very good morning and toodle, 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 pip. And we will say ta-ra. I think, yes, we will.